Good evening, everyone. I'm calling the meeting to order. Welcome to the May 6, 2024 meeting at CB11's Land Use, Landmarks, and Planning Committee. My name is Jason Villanueva, and I'm the chair of this committee. This meeting is being called to order at 6:37 p.m. Tonight, we are joined by District Manager Angel Muscade, the staff liaison to our committee. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. CB11 members, if you have a question about board business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand. For those in the public that are not present or through the hybrid function, the chat function should not be used for CB11 business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you're having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a member is when a board member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and then you can speak. Please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. Members of the public, if you have a question or comment about the subjects on the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom and or in person and wait to be recognized. We will now take attendance by roll call. Board members, please answer present when your name is called.
Adem Briha,
Absent.
Devin Crenshaw, Kenneth Crouch,
Present.
Jessica Elliott,
Present.
Jessica Morris,
Here.
Nilsa Orama,
Present.
Beverly Pavone,
Present.
Benny Torres, Jason Villanueva,
Present.
Candy Vivas Vasquez. We have quorum.
Excellent. Adoption of the agenda. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and was posted online. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Committee members, if you object to the adopting agenda, you may raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. We will skip over meeting minutes. Beverly was excellent enough to get the meeting minutes to me on time. Unfortunately, I was unable to review them, so I will be reviewing last month's and this month's meeting minutes next month, so we can close by June. Yeah.
Just to make a comment that, I would hope just to integrate a little bit more on, the presentation from the intern, because there's a lot of like really valuable information there. And I think happily hope filling things in it.
I'll add you to the share file. Thank you. And thank you, Beverly. Announcements. Do we have any announcements? Yes.
I have one, well, it's not really an announcement, but I sent an email to you and Xavier about the IVO presentation that we had at Environment Open Space and Parks, which was the request that we had made as a community board for them to look into how much money they're spending in DSNY for sanitation garages.
Yep.
And like to basically research the points of agreement asked for the sanitation, the dual district sanitation garage. So if you didn't watch the recording and you're interested about the sanitation garage, you can watch Environment Open Space and Parks, but I think it would be great to either have them present again here or at full board, depending on what we want.
I do agree with you. I did see the email that you sent, which I thank you for that. There is this item, just the committee members to be aware of, that we're going to be changing. And it is actually the points of agreement in totality. So it's definitely on our agenda.
Yes.
But you know, just in the interest of logic, like next month, we'll probably be cramming, I don't want to say cram, but we're gonna try to efficiently get through what we need to get through for projects relative. And we do have an informational update. No one else has any announcements. Any other announcements? So there was another organization, and correct me if I'm wrong, Angel, it was the, I believe, Historic Council group.
The Historic District Council.
Yes, I wasn't too familiar with them, but as those of us are aware, it's been a big interest of this board, and particularly for this year, to get more involved with landmark preservation, historic council. As you see, we've been getting a lot more interest and inquiries from the constituents. At full board last month, I was pretty much, you know, I want to say lobbied by a lot of the public our public constituents who want to see more action towards those efforts by the board. So I advise them, it's been on top of our agenda. It's something that we're constantly having a discussion about, but we definitely need to be a lot more committed into activating some of these other administrative agencies that aren't necessarily presenting to us the way that DCP so lovely does.
What, sorry,
Continuously.
just clarification,
Yeah,
Historic Districts Council did what? Would they approach the board to say hello and
yeah,
introduce
and they're gonna
themselves?
do a presentation next month.
That's wonderful to hear. A month or two ago, they partnered on a program at the Center for Architecture that I organized. And Chris Cirillo was a part of it from Ascendant, and Chris highlighted some preservation activities that Ascendant is doing in East Harlem. And I think it was surprising to a lot of audience members to see folks from Lincoln Center talking about preservation and people talking about East Harlem right next to that. So it was a kind of recognition that preservation is happening here. Good to hear.
That's why.
And speaking of preservation, I know there has been some talk about, the bank on 125th Street, are they part of that preservation, group? Or
No.
is that something that,
Unfortunately, I brought that up at full board, last month, where we had a concern that was brought up by constituents. We looked into the situation, unfortunately, that bank is, not landmarked or preserved.
They're on our agenda tonight, though. no?
Yeah, to provide the developers coming to present as to, what their plans are. They're making an act. We'll get into that when with their presentation, but yes, there's definitely an opportunity.
Good, I've got one too.
Yeah. Anybody else, any more announcements or informational updates?
So what was the name of the society that presented last month?
Or they're gonna present next month.
Okay.
It was,
it's not,
State East Harlem now, I mean, State Harlem now, the people that presented a couple of months ago, and they have two names. So that's that one. And Historic District Council is another thing that comes.
Historic District Council, sorry.
No problem, thank you.
If we can. So we'll now go into discussions and presentations.
David Rosenberg, from Rosenberg and Estes is the representative for, this, transit easement certification application. He's on call. He'll speak to the committee about their project and their land use application details. Mr. Rosenberg.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, also for having us to be able to present this application. My name is David Rosenberg. I'm counsel at Rosenberg and Estes, and we represent the applicant for this certification application. I see I'm not able to share my screen. I know that you have a lot on the agenda tonight, so I will try to be brief on this. There's not a whole lot here, as was mentioned. This is
You can share your screen now.
okay, great. Let's see. Yeah, so you can see this now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so as you can see here, this is an application for a transit easement certification for 51 East 125th Street, located on the northeast corner of East 125th and Madison. Other than the fact that we are applying for this certification, it is an otherwise as of right building. As part of this, there's an existing 3-story commercial building on the site. The plan for this building is to retain the existing commercial and to keep it operational throughout construction. Beyond my scope of expertise to know exactly how they're doing it, but they've apparently shored up some of the footings and braced some of the existing columns in the building to be able to support it. And as part of this, there would be both a vertical and horizontal enlargement of the building so that it would max out at 7 stories, approximately 80 feet tall, which is just at, I should say, the maximum base height for the existing zoning district, and would have approximately 5.4 FAR. The existing 16,000 or so square feet of commercial space would remain. As part of this, it would create 34 new units of housing, all 1 and 2 bedrooms, 11 of those units would be affordable through the 421A program. Would be 7 one-bedrooms and 3 two-bedroom units is the way that the mix breaks out. Back in 2022 and confirmed again last month, the MTA is not requiring a transit easement volume for this site. And so with that, I don't think there's a whole lot more to talk about the application, but as part of this process, we do want to hear from the community if there are particular questions, either for us or for the City Planning Commission, and points that the community board wants to raise. So with that, I will happy to take questions from members of the board and from the community.
Excellent. Thank you for your presentation. Members of the board, is there any questions? Jessica Morris and Jessica Elliott.
So Mr. Rosenberg, the project is, thank you for coming to the board. I know it's a process that we have been option to be involved in. Is the mandatory inclusionary housing is an option? I'm sorry. Voluntary inclusionary housing is an option on the site, which is rare. I know there may be some limitations regarding the height of the addition to the building, because of the structure. How far along in the development process is the team, and is there potential for consideration to increase the number of affordable units? And do you have a sense of, so that's one question, and do you have a sense of what the levels of affordability are within the building, i.e. pro forma? Just curious, yeah.
Yeah, so first with the inclusionary housing, I'm not sure that this is a voluntary inclusionary housing area. There are some constraints on the development for the special district. I can look into it to see particularly, but I don't think that, my understanding from the developers, that there's probably not enough with the constraints of being able to keep the existing building and enlarge on it where it becomes financially practical to do the voluntary inclusionary. As it relates to the 421A, so this is option B, which provides for 10% at 70% AMI and 20% at 130% AMI. In terms of where we are on development, it's very early days. So back in 2022, there was a big push to make sure that some of the initial work around the supports for the columns were done so that they could vest in the old 421A program. But ever since then, change in the interest rate environment and then also all the regulatory changes have kind of put a damper on it. But we imagine once we have approval to move forward, we will be in a position to start moving that forward within the next year or so.
Maybe just follow up, Jason. So, you know, I think in the community, there's a general sense that affordable housing, ideally more truly affordable housing than 130% AMI, is good. And so the fact that there's some potential for flexibility there, if the project is still in a fluid phase, that's something, you know, 7 stories is a real reasonable height for that corridor. So I think, you know, to consider if it is possible, the project may be limited by any number of constraints, but we like affordable housing here if possible. So to relay that message while things are still, and there's a lot up in the air as far as policies, but the project is vested in 421A and you're gonna stay that way throughout?
So as of now, the intention is to stay. The 485X, you know, is at this point, it's barely 2 weeks old. So I don't think that the development team has had the time to sit and run numbers to see what those options look like. But I'm certainly happy to talk with them about and express the community's preference to see more affordability, particularly at lower AMI bands, and seeing what works under the new programs.
Wonderful, thanks very much.
Thank you, Jessica. Elliot?
Yeah, I feel like apologies if I'm missing something. I'm just reading in the agenda, it's whether or not a transit easement is required at the property, and you noted in your presentation that it's not required. So can you explain to me or clarify what makes this not a fully as of right project?
This particular process, it's a joint certification both by the City Planning Commission and by the MTA. And so when we file these, as part of these applications, we have to file a request with MTA for them to determine whether or not an easement's going to be required. And before we can get Department of Building permits to actually move forward with the building, city planning and the MTA have to, quote, jointly certify that the easement is not required. So the MTA has done that already. And at the end of the community referral process, which I believe has a few more days to it, then the City Planning Commission will do the same.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying.
Just information purposes.
Got it.
Beverly, go on then, Vinnie, Torres.
So the easement is not required?
Correct.
Okay.
Vinnie Torres.
Thank you. So thank you for that information. I just want to speak quickly about potential, local hiring efforts on this project. As you may be or may not be aware of, the National Black Theater Project right in that vicinity and, other projects on 125th Street with the development soon, hopefully of the Dirt's property nearby and the Extel property on 125th and Lexington have all kind of engaged at some level as it relates to local hiring efforts. Is that something that's being discussed here, explored, already set? Can you speak a little bit about what that looks like? And also tell us, is this project as of right, it seems, is it intended to yield open shop, non-union type of construction rates and wages, or is there due to the 421A B program that you've listed in your slide, required to adhere to prevailing wage requirements for workers on the project? Can you share some information about that?
Yeah, so I'm happy to. First, with the building, this is right, other than the certification, it's an as-of-right project. As it relates to union, this particular option of 421A doesn't have the prevailing wage requirement. As it relates, and then to your other question, as it relates to local hiring, this was a conversation that, we, at the applicant team, we've had. Speaking with the general contractor, it is still far too early for them to start. They haven't actually done a lot of their sub work and their hiring yet. But once it comes time, once more construction financing is in place, after all the approvals there, we hope to be able to reach back out to the community board and other local groups that the community board might suggest, because we think that local hiring is important for, this is a building, it's part of the community, it's been here, we want to stay that way. We have local businesses here, we've done a lot of this work to keep the local businesses in place while we're able to do this construction, and we think being able to do local hiring would be good for the project.
Thank you.
All right, before we move on, can you advise who the general contractor of the project is?
So the general contractor is SNBD Enterprises LLC. Their DBA is Vision Development, and they're both owner's rep and the general contractor on the job.
Excellent, thank you for the information. Is there any other questions from the board or the public? That being said, thank you for your time and your presentation, and we look forward to you coming back and providing us an update on the project. Good luck.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, is our presenters, so Lauren George, this is an update on the MAD with 3Ds Equities Project at 125th Street and Lexington Avenue.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having us today. My name is Lauren George and I'm with CMV Consulting. I represent MAD Equities, the owner of the parcel, several lots on the corner of 125th and Lexington. I know, and I have with me Bill Bollinger, who's with MAD Equities this evening. We wanted to come to the board. I know that there's been discussion about preservation of the bank, but there's already been a demolition permit issued. And the plan here is to create a mixed-use building on this corner to include affordable homeownership opportunities. So I know somebody came, Wendy, my former colleague, Wendy Gallegos came to the board a couple of years ago. And at that point, the plan was to try to do an entirely commercial building. Since then, it has changed to include residential. And I'm really excited to report that the plan is now to include 73 residential apartments with income limited income restricted home ownership opportunities, trying to use the open door term sheet, the HPD term sheet that is a bit in flux right now, but the goal is to make these income restricted ownership co-ops. So the building will include a ground floor of retail, probably a pharmacy or something like that. And then there will be 5 floors of commercial, and then the top of the building, between the upper stack, will be residential apartments. So that is the plan. I don't have like well-developed plan right now to share with you because we're not in the same stage as the previous project you just saw. We do have to go through that same process of a joint certification about a transit easement with MTA and DCP. So that is actually something that was begun in the past and was stalled out. Honestly, because the MTA was telling the ownership that they needed a significant amount of land for the Second Avenue subway project. So this project was stalled quite a bit and put on hold. But we've since learned that it's not a significant an easement that's being required. So this is right on the corner where there is a transit stair that's actively being used currently. So they're currently in the process of demolition. The buildings are about 65% demolished already as we speak. So we wanted to come to you and just share that update. I think the big deal here is that obviously there's very, very few opportunities for income restricted or affordable homeownership in Manhattan, period. And this will be a very rare project. So we're going to work with several community partners to try to get that done and make sure that it brings, you know, really well needed, deeply needed, affordable ownership opportunities to the community. So look forward to, you know, hearing questions. I know that Vinnie Torres will ask about local hiring, and for sure we will come back to the board at the time. And, you know, when the time is right. Right now it's premature, but we are committed to working with you and with Positive Workforce and with other community organizations to make sure that, you know, the hiring here is truly bringing economic benefit to the community. But I think the homeownership affordable program with HPD has not been used that much. So there's definitely a significant amount of subsidy required, and there'll be lots of sources here. So the team is pulling together several ideas and sources for making this building come to fruition. So we apologize, I don't have much to show you physically, but we're here to answer questions. My colleague Bill is here to answer questions, who's been part of this process as well.
Thank you, Laura, for your presentation. Jessica Morris?
Thank you very much for coming to the table and for providing an update. You can hear me, yes?
Yes.
You know, I until recently considered myself fairly new in the community, but you reached 10 years and you've been around long enough. To know that it's a community that now at this point wants to be able to have its cake and eat it too. To present such a wonderful program of affordable homeownership in the wake of demolishing a face of history it's heartbreaking in some ways. And I think that, and I know, and so just there's a, you know, I'm an architect by training, an urban designer, community development and preservation are all part of that toolkit. One of the things I just want to call out as a gap across the board, and East 125th Street is a prime example of where it is going to have effect. The economic co-benefits of preservation go beyond the value of your asset. So I just want to point to, because it's not registered, because it can be demolished, because the facade is the emblem of place. It you know, it's precious in a way, but it is also something that can be detached from what's going on behind it. So that's my advocate speaking. At the same time, looking at the Bach Museum up in Cambridge, where at Harvard, if you're familiar with it, it's a wonderful museum. It got sick and they removed the entire backside of the building, left only the facade, the first foot of the depth of the facade, and built a whole new building behind it.
made the connections that needed to happen, and made the whole interior program work without demolishing that, that face. That was important. So I don't know where you are in your development. I don't know who your architect is, but I would urge you to consider if your fantastic program and good intention of providing that kind of access and baseline in the heart of East Harlem for the future can also consider the potential of integrating the past in that kind of you know, you're a steward of something that, whether I haven't been up there in a couple of weeks, so it may be just far too late, but doesn't take much, but some coordination. So we're here now. Happy endings do happen, and Saved by the Wrecking Ball can be a storyline, which is also good for PR and all other things. So, that's my pitch, and we will carry on.
Thank you, Jessica. Jessica Elliott and Angel, Ms. Kane.
Thank you for your presentation. Just, you know, when you do come back for updates, if it would be great if you could come before 50% design development, just so that the community has a chance to weigh in on overall design moves before it gets too deep in documentation. Thanks.
We definitely will be. It's, you know, it's not it's fully baked, you know, but unfortunately, there was a feasibility analysis done with the thought of trying to preserve some of the facade, and it just is not workable, unfortunately. And, you know, the building was vacant, has been vacant for 10 years or more, I think. And it's just really hard to adaptively reuse these kinds of spaces, which we know because the same company, we just worked on a adaptive reuse of a bank in the Bronx that just got landmarks approval and is going to be opening a new supermarket. But it's very challenging, and especially when you're looking at something like affordable housing, it's already quite challenged in terms of the capital stack and the sources you need there. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I understand. I hear you. So.
Any other questions? Vinci.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And thank you, Lauren, for making a commitment for local hiring. We definitely do appreciate that. That said, 65% of the demolition has been completed, which is one of the first phases of the project. And despite our early efforts and having conversations with Wendy and others at Mad Equity directly, to no avail, we were able to place any local hiring placements on that portion of the demolition, which has already transpired and been completed. Which brings me to just a few questions. Demolition had commenced, and then it seemed to have just completely been shut down from what we can see. Is there an anticipated start date for getting back into? I'm imagining that maybe redesign changes have now been a big reason why you have the delay. On the affordable home ownership, is that going to be for all the apartments available, or will that be for a portion thereof?
So the first question, there is a pause right now, and I understand it's supposed to resume. There were some issues with the MTA because of the active stair, which, you know, I don't think was a great idea, frankly, in my humble opinion, to have an active stair being used while you're demoing a building next door, but that was a choice they made. So there's some adjustments going on as a result of that. And my understanding from the contractor liaison is that it's going to be resuming hopefully by next week or the following. And it should be about 4 more weeks of work is what I've been told.
Awesome.
And the apartments, you want to talk to Bill can speak to the planned program for the housing.
Yeah, the plan right now is to have all of those residential apartments in the open door program. I know AMI bans are important. That's something to be discussed to you know, what target points that those will be. Generally, the program runs, I believe, around 80% to 120% AMI. So obviously you have to work with the agencies, and we work with the local folks to determine, you know, kind of a range of price points for the project. But all of the units right now, we would plan to put into the open door, so they'd all be affordable home ownership.
That's awesome. Okay. And then as it relates to the completion of the first phase demolition, when is it anticipated is it gonna continue now with the construction, or there's gonna be another delay before we get back to work?
We would hope not. One of the things that we're actually working with is a special contractor who, we asked them because we do care about historic resources. They're actually taking it down and repurposing, the important, architectural aspects. So there's a little bit of a delay, I think, also coordinating with him. They reuse, it's not just going to like a demo. They're actually reusing the stone and some of the interior pieces, for other projects.
You guys know this person, it's called Demolition Depot. So Evan Bloom is someone who I think has a site or building in East Harlem and repurposes architectural salvage, unique materials for other uses and other buildings in the future. So hopefully it can bring back some of the pieces and maybe even have them as a lobby element or something like that, is possible here because they are salvaging, the nicer elements, pieces that are salvageable here.
That would be great. That's awesome. Hopefully, Laura, are you on the design team?
No, but I
You need
actually
to-
used to work at Landmarks, just so you guys know, and I just want to be clear that when I worked there, there was a request to designate this building and it was rejected by Landmarks a few times.
Right, but there's some way they can incorporate some of that.
Yeah, design elements in the,
100% we're doing that, yes.
That is a good
that's why
idea.
they're working with this Demolition Depot guy so that they can reuse pieces and bring them back as, you know, features in the future to try to have some nod to the past.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions? That's it? Public? Yes, sir.
Question, how much of the building are they saving? I'm not legally an expert of the issues that goes on in Harlem. I used to live in Harlem, but I don't call myself within any much longer. But I'm just trying to figure out how much of the building is being saved.
Can they hear?
That I don't know, but we can ask to find out how much of that structure will be saved and repurposed, and we can let you know.
I'm impressed that they heard you. That's why I was just making a big reference.
Yeah, you have a good
There is a
projected
bell.
voice, sir.
Plus, we don't have any cross talking, so that's usually the system process. Is there any other question? Beverly?
Yes, in regards, thank you for the presentation. In regards to the units, you said 73 units. How tall will this building be, and what is the apartment sizes? Because we see a lot of buildings in East Harlem being built, but we're only getting 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Or just buildings that's nothing but one bedroom if they under some type of. So I'd like to know whether or not you would have larger apartments for the families to stay in East Harlem, and if that's part of your plan. And also the AMI, I think you really need to work on that, even if it's part of the open door program under HPD, because the 80 or 70% to 120, we just had learned about another program, and they're going from 70 to 130 AMI. You know, that's nothing that's affordable here for the residents here who's been sticking it out for East Harlem and wants to stay in East Harlem and have more generations of their family here in East Harlem. Even for home ownership, which I'm glad you're having that program, because as it stands now, home ownership in East Harlem is very, very almost non-existent, maybe just 5%. So I'm glad that you're thinking of a home ownership program, but larger apartments for families, and not just 1 and 2 bedroom.
So good news, Ms. Pavone, we do have some 3 bedrooms. There's about out of the total, there's 7. So it's really there's about 31 1 bedrooms envisioned, 35 2 bedrooms, and 7 3 bedrooms envisioned. I don't have the square footage for you right now, but we can come back, and as we get further along, we can give you a little more detail on that. I think, it's really about working with the term sheet that's designed for homeownership. And what I understand from my conversations with HPD, sort of in a global policy sense about this program, is that folks who can qualify for a mortgage, usually the minimum is 80% AMI to 120. That's the range that this program really is trying to target. And I understand that that doesn't meet East Harlem community where it is. The median income of East Harlem is much lower. I recognize that. But this also does provide opportunities for some people who have two incomes, households, to be able to try to invest in a new co-op. So there are a few family-sized units included here.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's a co-op, not a condo, it's co-op? It's co-op, not a condo?
It's a co-op, yes.
Plan to be a co-op.
Well, that's the way that the program works. It's like
For the financing, yeah, for the financing structure, it needs to be a cooperative in order to put underlying mortgage on it, on the property.
And just to make a point before we go to the next question, with HPD, this board has requested HPD to do a formal training as it relates to the financing, because I do understand there's a lot of concerns to the public efforts of that agency. And if there's questions which are relative to AMI and other challenges, then we need to start focusing on our legislators and elected officials as opposed to the private and public developers. It's just a moot point. May not necessarily happen within the next month or two, but it is this board's position. I have personally requested, because we spent probably 20 minutes 2 months ago debating the semantics of the AMI, and unfortunately, this is not the place for that. For lack of a better word, that argument. That's something that we need to take to City Hall and even probably further up the ladder to Congress. So just thought to make that as a point. This board is gonna request that training, and it's gonna be open to the public. And you have every opportunity to be there, whether it be in person or online. Sorry, board members, then I can go to the public. Candy, then Beverly again. We're not gonna let's not rehash the same questions either. And then we'll go to the public and then we'll move on.
Hi, I'm sorry, I came in late. I didn't hear if you had, how many apartment units you have for the co-op?
So there's projected to be 73. And this building, again, is ground floor retail, the next 5 stories commercial, and then 6 through 13. I don't think I told you that part. 13 is the tallest story here, residential.
Beverly?
My last question is regarding, are you getting any type of tax breaks or tax abatement for this program?
Yeah, so the commercial would go through the ICAP process. And the residential would end up having either a 421A or a Article 11 tax exemption.
Even 420C? Not 420C.
No, Article 11.
Yeah.
Article 11,
Yeah, because
and the commercial is the IPAC.
The ICAP, Industrial Commercial Abatement Program.
the taxes are lower in the commercial rents, so that is a condo lot space.
Right. And is that tax abatement for the ICAP and Article 11 a time limit on it? And if it is, what happens after that time limit? Because we also, having this problem with the 421A being exhausted, and people who wants to be aged in place is not able to do that. Plus the fact that, a lot of the people that comes into these programs are very happy to have them, but even the education part about what may happen afterwards, if the program no longer is getting these tax breaks, is part of their training in order to stay in place.
So let me start backwards. We would be working with most likely a not-for-profit like a neighborhood restore or restore homes, where they train they do education and they train people who are looking to purchase in all the economic aspects of purchasing a condominium, or in this case, a co-op. And they would teach them also about, the not just what does it mean to own, what are your responsibilities as the owner, but also what, how a co-op works, because there's obviously some coordination there. And then they would talk about the long-term aspect of how long the tax abatement is. I believe it's 20 years with a 10-year phase out for the Article 11, and the ICAP is like 15 years with a 10-year phase out as well.
Thank you.
They have the same training in Brooklyn on the community boards that you just presented. They already have.
Excellent. Yes, Mr. McPhee.
Angel view, formal stuff around here. So we're working on dates with HPD for that training. And so far as the financing training, our fellow, as part of our last little gift to us, made a video for us. That we'll be posting on our website in the next couple of days, about, the financing of affordable housing. So we can have that, we'll have that available, and, before we have the HPD workshop. I had a question for Lauren and William. For the commercial office space, what kinds of tenant, I know it's early, but what kind of tenants are you thinking, not for the ground floor, but for the offices? What kinds of office uses are you targeting?
Lauren, you're on mute, but so
Sorry.
we're looking at a variety of office uses. It's medical offices are always a possibility, and just regular office space as well, not-for-profit space as well as market space. Any office users that you guys think might be suitable, we would be glad to talk to as well. It's early in that process, so the sooner the better. If there's somebody out there that'd be interested in the space.
Thank you.
Thank you for the answer and the opportunity. I think the board knows that. Any other questions? That being said, thank you for your presentation. We look forward for your update, and appreciate you guys coming proactively to address the concerns of the community with the bank.
Always. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So, in the interest of time, before we go to the city of Yes, I do want to deal with the old business. If there's no objection to that. I don't know if necessarily we need the presenter, but this is something that we reviewed last month. We had discussion at full board. I have not received any question, concern, complaint from any constituent, any board member, or any nonprofit organization within this district as it relates to this item. So this being said, Project Fine is requesting for a letter of support to engage. Keyword is a letter of support to engage. We're not giving up the land. We're not, because I know sometimes we get a little conspiratorial, right? This is step one of the process, right? So Project Fine will request for the letter of support to engage HPD as it relates to the disposition of city-owned property concerning a planned senior housing development project at 123rd Street in Park Avenue.
Mr. Gilchrist from Project Fine is on. Should the committee have any questions of the?
Excellent, thank you. Prior to any motions, do we have any other questions relevant to this matter? Jessica? No questions. I'm open to taking a motion.
Motion to support a letter of, motion to provide a letter of support to, for Project Fine to engage HPD or the disposition of city-owned property at 123rd Street, Park Avenue.
I'm first, I have a second. Kenneth,
Yeah, second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any objection, any abstentions, any present not voting? The motion carries. Congratulations, project line, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Enjoy
David.
your.
This is a matter of process, it will go to full board, we'll vote on it at full board, and then your letter will be issued to you. No, it's okay, it's for the record. Thank you. Now, moving on to the most exciting part of the agenda. DCP, City of West, housing opportunity.
Oh, here we go.
Very good. The lighter doesn't work. Yeah, ready for this? The point of the. All right, get comfortable.
Plenty of build up to this. We've been doing CBS for about a year now, so. You guys are all federal hardened veterans of this process at this point, so I don't think we need to go into what City of Yes is all about. Just brief introductions. I'm Trevor, I'm a community planner with DCP.
Hi, Angela Felicio. I'm in the transportation division at DCP.
And Jose, if you want. Unmute.
Hi, everyone. Jose from DCP too. Happy to see you all.
Welcome back.
So we've got a lot of content to cover tonight. We're gonna try to go through it quickly and leave some room at the end for Q&A. Same process as before, we'll also take any written questions back and bring them to the authors of this proposal. But I think, we don't have to rehash too much what this is about, since I think it's familiar to you all, but this is the most ambitious proposal, I think, in the city's history to promote new housing growth, both in affordable housing and market rate housing, and sort of address head on this housing crisis, which is reaching just worse proportions with each passing year. And the idea, and you're gonna hear us say this a million times, so I just want to apologize, is to build a little bit more housing in every neighborhood. This is an incremental, holistic approach that's trying to target expanding housing types, housing options in every context, from low density neighborhoods in Eastern Queens to high density neighborhoods like East Harlem. So again, I think this is a question that needs no answering, but why do we need more housing in New York City? The apartment vacancy rate right now is sitting at 1.41%. This is the lowest vacancy since 1968. And I don't think I need to tell you that this has very real human consequences in terms of housing insecurity, in terms of tenant harassment, in terms of homelessness. We all feel the effects of the housing crisis throughout the city, and we have to come up with a collective solution to fundamentally increase housing supply drastically in the coming years, since this problem is not going away anytime soon. And you can see at the top right how housing production has fallen off decade over decade. If you compare where we were a century ago in the 1920s, the housing production numbers were just off the charts, and production has dropped off decade over decade, and New York City is sort of falling behind despite being this greatest of cities in the US. Compared to other cities, you can see it's just not producing the housing to meet the crisis, and that is due in large part due to restrictive zoning. And so this is, like all the previous city gas proposals, this is really taking a hard look at these outdated zoning regulations and how can we sort of modernize our zoning to produce more housing across the board. Yes, so fundamentally, this is a housing supply issue. I want to point your attention towards this map, and this shows where housing was built between 2010 and 2023. And I think you'll notice a trend here between downtown Brooklyn, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Long Island City, obviously, is a massive one. Astoria, Hudson Yards, these are all neighborhoods that were dramatically rezoned, either in the Bloomberg era or the de Blasio era, including East Harlem in 2017. So a lot of the housing growth we've seen has resulted from neighborhood studies as a way of, really expanding, the universe of housing production in certain areas. What we're talking about tonight is a very different approach. We're talking about something that's gonna be experienced throughout the city in all geographies. Because if you look at where no housing occurred, or very limited housing growth occurred, you'll notice that some neighborhoods are just failing to produce housing altogether. I'm talking about single family contexts, like in South Brooklyn, Eastern Queens. Not really sure what's happening up in Inwood and Washington Heights. I can't speak to that, but Riverdale. So this is a collective crisis, and it requires a collective solution. It requires every neighborhood to step up and do a little bit more, produce more housing to address this crisis. And we think that with the proposals we're discussing tonight, it should result in over 100,000 units of housing over the next 15 years. The housing shortage in New York City is estimated to be somewhere around 500,000. So, this isn't gonna get us all, where we need to go. Zoning is only one part of the solution, as we always say, but this would make a real dent. We firmly believe in the housing crisis. And the beauty in the proposal lies in the fact that it would be incremental, so no one neighborhood would experience dramatic change, like East Harlem following rezone. I don't know if you want to characterize that as dramatic change, but it's very different in how we're approaching it. And the neighborhood studies will still continue, but we really need to think more holistically about the housing crisis. And I think one final point on this is, it's really, when you have a scarcity of supply, it becomes a tenant's right issue. When there's near zero vacancy for affordable apartments in this city, tenants are virtually powerless against landlords in terms of getting repairs that they needed, the ceilings collapsed in their kitchen, whatever the case may be. So by increasing housing supply, we're also hopefully decreasing housing vacancy and empowering tenants in that way. That's part of it, and I don't think this needs any further explanation, nor does this. So this is just a high level overview. I know in previous CDBS proposals, we had these goals and buckets. We're not really doing that tonight. We're just talking about the proposals that are targeted towards high density contexts are such as Community District 11. Citywide proposals, a lot to get into there, miscellaneous, and hopefully at the end, there'll be enough time to briefly hit on the proposals in low density contexts. And so I think it's really important to see what sort of low density neighborhoods in the city are being asked to do, since these are neighborhoods that were more often than not downzoned in the Bloomberg era. Where those about 30% of the city's landmass was rezoned. And while you saw some dramatic upzonings like Hudson Yards, Long Island City, a lot of neighborhoods like in Riverdale and Eastern Queens, they were downzoned, and that's why there's been virtually no housing production. And a big part of the increment of this 100,000 that we're talking about tonight is derived from these low density proposals. So this map sort of shows you the area that's considered high density, that's R6 through R10. Obviously that includes all of Community District 11 and low density. So just bear that in mind. So the first one we want to touch on, and this is probably one of the most important planks that we'll be talking about tonight as far as it relates to Community District 11, is universal affordability preference. So this proposal expands on the existing framework for AIRS, that's affordable independent residence for seniors. That's a program where new developments that provide affordable residence for seniors get about at least a 20% bump in FAR. So we're taking this framework and we're expanding it to all high density districts across the city, meaning that any development that wants to include at least wants to incorporate affordable housing in their development can. So the increment, let me go forward a bit. So you can see in this map where in sort of the yellow shade where AIRS is currently applicable. And the darker colors is where AIRS isn't applicable. So UAP is going to be expanded to encompass all the areas, both in the yellow color and in the orange color. So any under UAP, this is going to be an FAR bump for any development that includes affordable housing. And here's what it looks like for Community District 11. I just want to jump to the chart real quick. So say a building in an R10 district has 10 FAR, or residential use as of right, they could opt into universal affordability preference and get a 2 FAR bump. All of the units in that increment in the 2 FAR would have to be permanently income restricted housing. So there's no market rate in the UAP bump. But as part of that, and you might ask, why would a developer do that? Like we were talking about tonight, now there's this new tax abatement program that just was passed in the state budget for 85X as of 2 weeks ago. So we can expect to see, if this passes as is, more developments opting into this. What it means for existing programs like voluntary inclusionary housing, this would basically mean that voluntary inclusionary housing will be phased out. So voluntary inclusionary housing is mapped in Community District 11 along 125th Street as part of the special 125th Street district. In a lot of ways, this is sort of like an obsolete, or would be made obsolete by UAP, because it's voluntary for one thing, like UAP. Nobody's forcing a developer to opt into this affordability program. But also, it's not, the affordability requirements of voluntary inclusionary housing, or VIH, would not be as deep as those under UAP. So we were talking just earlier, which is great about being the third agenda items, that you can reference the discussion from earlier. So the AMIs here would be 60%. VIH is 80%. And what's more is voluntary inclusionary housing doesn't have what's called income averaging. That is, all the units, all affordable units produced through voluntary inclusionary housing would be at the 80 AMI income band. And I believe you touched on this before, Beverly, that isn't actually accessible in practice to a lot of area residents. Whereas the affordable units produced through UAP would be at 60 AMI, and they would have income averaging, which means you can mix and match AMI bands. You could have 40% AMI, you could have 30% AMI, paired with, 80, as long as it equals out to 60. So we think that's good, and that's anywhere, any development in these high density districts can do that. Whereas with VIH, it would have to have been mapped over that area to opt in. And with MIH, MIH would have to be established. MIH is not changing. I mean, it's not going away as part of this proposal. Rather, what is being changed about MIH is that these AIRS increments, the FAR bumps you get through UAP and previously AIRS, are sometimes greater than what you would have the bump under MIH. So the MIH bump, the MIH FARs are basically being brought up to match the new UAP FARs. And I can go back to the table. But we have a good case study here, R72, this is probably the most widely mapped residential zoning district in Community District 11, and certainly Community District 10, and mainly throughout Upper Manhattan. So you get 3.44 FAR as of right, a residential floor area. That would result in 50 units. I mean, we don't actually have a lot size here, so we'll just say that whatever the lot size is, that would produce 50 units. Say they did want to opt into universal affordability preference, and this is an area that, maybe wasn't part of a VIH or MIH area before. Now there's this new increment that they can actually take advantage of. That could result in as many as 20 to 22 more affordable homes with an increment of 5 FAR. So under UAP, this bump would go up to 3.44 to 5, and everything in that delta is income restricted housing. And now, sorry. And so, yeah, I know that's sort of a stuttering way to go through it, but we're very excited about this program. The department believes it has the potential to result in thousands of more income restricted housing units in the years to come. In fact, we estimate that, I have a slide here, had it existed since 2014, and I don't know exactly what the methodology for calculating this was, it would have resulted in 20,000 more income restricted housing units than what exists today. And you can also see in this rendering what the massing might look like in this scenario. One thing that also has to be changed are the building envelopes for the zoning districts. They have to be expanded essentially to accommodate these higher preferential FARs. Because under the existing zoning envelopes for multiple districts, you can actually accommodate that extra bulk. So we're gonna share around this slideshow so you can you can dig into it more, but you're able to see like the base height for UAP developments is increasing. That's the height before the building sets back. So you know, if you look at a newer development in East Harlem, you'll notice it rises to a certain base height. That's like your street wall that creates a lovely contextual street wall, and then it sets back, and there's probably more stories of residential or what have you, and that setback is to allow for more light and air. So this is just increasing not only the FARs, but the base heights and the max heights of these various high density districts to accommodate the new UAP FARs. Because like we touched on before, the AIRS framework didn't extend to all zoning districts previously. And we can come back to this in the questions. I know we're already at the first proposal, and it's a lot to digest. But that more or less covers it. One last change to MIH, in addition to the increases in the preferential FARs, is option 3 is going to be a standalone option. This is sometimes known as the deep affordability option. That's 20% of the units set aside at an average of 40% AMI. This was not a standalone option previously. I'm not sure like what scenarios it could have been unlocked. I think probably only in the case of 100% affordable developments. But now this is an option that's unlocked even in the case of mixed income developments. And you know, piggybacking on the conversation of term sheets, which I'm not very familiar with, but there's also streamlines rules for 100% affordable projects. I think specifically, like we were talking about before, there's issues essentially in how NIH plays with affordable homeownership term sheets. I don't understand that myself. That'd probably be one to ask HPD when you have that presentation, but that's being tweaked here. We can get you follow-up information on that after this. So that was the main plank of this proposal for a high density district. There's a lot to get into at the citywide level. First and foremost is parking, and I want to hand it over to Angela.
Hi, again, Angela from the Transportation Division. And so sort of one of the puzzle pieces that is allowing more residential to get built in this program is we are proposing ending all parking mandates for purely residential buildings in all of New York City. So this makes parking optional in all new buildings. Many other cities around the country and the world have done this already and have found success. And you know, one of the major reasons is mandated parking is really expensive to provide. It drives up rent, it prevents new housing from being built. It's, you know, an obstacle to housing growth. And as a caveat, parking will also be allowed if a developer wants to build parking in their building. By all means, if the market says, you know, the only way we're gonna sell this building is if there's parking in it, well, then we think that you should have parking. But if you're building a building on top of a subway and parking is preventing you from building that, then maybe we shouldn't have parking. This is just an illustration of just sort of understanding parking spaces versus living space. 2 parking spaces take up about the same space as a studio apartment. So if we're thinking about the costs of how can we possibly get more, you know, homes, for every 2 parking spaces, you know, we can get 1 more apartment. So this is just an example of, you know, sort of what we're talking about. So say we have this, this site that is in great location, is walkable to transit. It is zoned and would allow for a 16-unit apartment building to get built there. But if you build more than 10 units, if you build less than 10 units, you can waive out of parking. If you build more than 10 units, you're required to have parking. So a developer is only gonna build 10 units, because how are you actually gonna fit parking in this site? Or so you end up with, a building that has 10 units and no parking. If we waive the parking, then they're gonna build 16 units on the same site, because, that's sort of better for anyone. So the parking, in this example, the parking mandate is essentially providing you less housing and no parking. And so in the sort of coming up with this proposal, we talked a lot about, if we don't require parking, is any parking actually gonna get built? And so we looked around the city, currently, has that ever happened? Have they ever built buildings? Have developers ever put parking in when they weren't required? And in fact, in some cases they have. These are 4 examples throughout the city of places where developers have provided more than parking that is required, or in the case that's on the right here, on 120th Street, they could have waived out of parking and instead they provided 29 spaces. So it is possible. So in addition to just sort of lifting all parking mandates, there's sort of some other tweaks in the zoning that we think will also help facilitate more housing throughout the city. For one, we're lifting parking mandates also for all houses of worship. So if you have a local church where people, the congregation walks to the church, they do not have to have a parking lot, which they're currently required to have. Similarly, community facilities with sleeping accommodations, which currently are required to have parking, we're going to waive parking for them too. We're also waiving some parking for the non-residential portions of mixed-use developments. That's actually only in low and medium density districts. That doesn't pertain to you. If you currently have parking in your building and want to remove it, you can, but we're gonna try to make it a little bit difficult, so it's not just something that can be, swept out from under you. You're gonna be required to have a CPC authorization to remove any parking that already exists. We are simplifying floor area exemptions relating to parking spaces. So what this means is, if I'm a developer and I want to provide some parking, we are allowing you to waive some of the floor area for that parking, so that you can actually put some parking spaces in your site, and not get sort of penalized for it. We are allowing the public use of accessory parking. So what this means is, if you are in a residential building now, and then when it was built, it was required to have 10 accessory parking spaces. Those spaces currently are only allowed to be used by the residents of that building. And so we are allowing, if that building chooses, to open those spaces up to get used by the public. So if that parking lot currently has 10 units in it and only 8 units are being used by the residents of that building, currently those 2 other spots are just left vacant. And we're saying, well, maybe we can better utilize the existing parking that already exists in the neighborhood by allowing those accessory parking units to get used by the public. And finally, we're cleaning up some Manhattan core regulations, which also doesn't really do. But I also want to flag, there are a bunch of things that we are not doing. We are not changing any on-street parking regulations. All the parking that's currently on the street, we are not touching at all. That's not a zoning thing anyway. We're not changing any off-street parking regulations for purely commercial or industrial buildings. They're still going to be required to provide parking. We're not imposing any new parking maximums. So in some cities, they've eliminated parking, but also brought the parking maximums down to sort of squeeze out parking. And we're saying that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to get rid of all parking. We're trying to encourage housing. So we're not going to touch parking maximums. We're not automatically removing any existing parking. If you have a parking spot, no parking lot in your building right now, it's going to continue to exist unless you decide to remove it with an authorization. And we're not going to force any developer to not build parking. If a developer wants to put parking in their building, they absolutely can. This is not a restriction. This is just making parking optional. That's the end of my parking spiel. I will pass it back over.
Angela will be around for questions.
Yeah.
After. Right, moving on with the citywide proposals, for CHO. Office to residential conversion, you probably heard a lot about this one during the pandemic. I think, you know, this is still very topical, moving into the post-pandemic world as, office vacancy remains sort of sticky, whereas, you know, in a lot of other aspects, the city's rebounded, there's still high vacancy rates, and there's clearly a glut of Class B office space that's, you know, people are having trouble leasing. So where the zoning is at currently, with office to residential conversions, you're gonna see where it's permitted in this map in the darker shade of pink. You can see this does not extend to Community District 11, currently. And the cutoff here of the eligibility date is 1961. That's to say, you can only convert an office building to residential if it was built before 1961, and if it's in this geography. Under City of Aspen Housing Opportunity, we're proposing to move that cutoff date from 1961 to 1990. So drastically expanding the universe of potential conversions, as well as making conversion eligibility citywide. So not restricted to these sort of arbitrary geographies where it's currently only applicable. So that means, you know, if the owner of an older commercial building on 125th Street that was built in like 1970 wishes to convert to residential use, they could under this proposal. And this is another instance in which that housing policy legislation that was passed with the state budget is playing very well with the CHO proposal, since there's a new tax incentive to you know, for tax abatement for office residential conversions where certain affordability requirements are met. So this has the potential to drastically increase housing supply and also the number of income restricted housing units on the market. Another one is to allow buildings with only studios and one-bedroom apartments in central locations. This would apply to Community District 11. So under zoning, currently, there's something called the dwelling unit factor, which for high density districts such as Community District 11 is 680. So this is essentially an averaging technique. This is not to say studios are not currently allowed, or a studio has to be 680 feet, since that's obviously not the case. Rather, in a building, you have to divide the amount of residential floor area by 680 and have the average unit work out to that number. So that's basically the controlling factor in the number of units you can provide in a building. As you have that residential floor area divided by 680, that's the maximum number of allowable units. However, there are a lot of regulations that already speak to this. If we're talking about health and safety and you know, just like light and air, access to windows. There's the multiple dwelling law, there's the building code, there's a lot of overlapping regs that already speak to this. We don't think zoning is appropriate to control the size of apartment buildings when. And this is not a proposal that's gonna like create windowless bedrooms. I think that was in the media before. Rather, what we're seeing a lot and why we think this is fundamentally an anti-gentrification proposal in a context such as East Harlem, which is a more lower income community, is, you know, clearly, and it was already mentioned tonight, there's not enough 3-bedroom units, family sized units on the market. And there's a lot of competition for these units. But what we're seeing citywide is a decrease in household sizes. We have people who want studios, either they're younger people who are looking for their first apartment, or they're people who are trying to age in place, or they're people on the lower income bands. These are people whose studios are a very desirable option, and under the dwelling unit factor, there's simply not enough of them being produced. And so what you have is you have, you know, people going into roommate situations, people who would rather live alone, taking up 3-bedroom apartments in Crown Heights among roommates because there's not enough studios. We think that if we expand the potential to produce more studios in these desirable contexts, say like Midtown Manhattan, you could have, a lot more housing options for people who wanna live in those areas who don't necessarily need multiple bedrooms or who want to be in a rooming situation. We don't think zoning is the appropriate place to control bedroom sizes when there's already these other regulations. So we do think that by increasing the amount of studios on the market, you'll see less pressure in more low income communities and decrease competition for family sized units. So that's the main thrust of this, and we can discuss it later and we can get back to with the author's views, because we understand that this the rationale here might be a little problematic for this board. So I mean, we're happy to talk it out. This is also speaking to the dwelling unit factor. I just didn't advance to the slides. So that it will also enable the emerging shared housing typology by removing this sort of arbitrary restriction. And here's a chart that shows the dwelling unit factor in different districts. This is the 680 we're talking about before your receipts applicable in R6 through R10. Yeah, it's quite high in some lower density contexts too, like R3 and R4. And this is something that existed previously in the city. I mean, the dwelling unit factor was introduced in the 1961 zoning resolution. Here's an example on the Upper East Side, the Barbizon. You have 655 small and shared units. It looks just like any other building, but it couldn't be built today because of dwelling unit factor regulations.
You're at about 30 minutes, just so you're aware.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'll move quickly. So contextual infill on campuses and irregular sites. So this is referring to NYCHA campuses for one, but also any campus that's really over 1.5 acres. So that could be a church or community facility. There's a lot of typologies that fit this bucket. Right now, it's extremely difficult to pursue any sort of infill on these campuses due to a variety of zoning regulations, mainly the fact that these are height factor buildings. That's the older sort of bulk regulations, like NYCHA's Tower in the Park, that's height factor. Whereas, so there's contextual quality housing bulk is not allowed as of right. Under current zoning, this would lift that restriction, but also lift outdated regulations like the sliver law. That's where you have small lots and the development can't build to the full allowable FAR because it has to match the height of the two adjacent buildings, and it can't be any taller than the street wall if it doesn't meet the minimum width. This is like another example of an arbitrary cap that really reduces the amount of housing that can be produced. And that was established before the advent of contextual zoning, which has height limits built in. The whole impetus for the sliver law was the idea that you would have these really tall, non-contextual buildings, whereas contextual zoning controls for that. So a bit more about campus infill. You're able to see what that looks like. We spoke to the mixing rules. That's quality housing bulk. This is not tantamount to the privatization of NYCHA or even enabling NYCHA infill, because there's a whole other suite of land use approvals that would have to happen in order for a NYCHA campus to build more affordable housing as infill developments. This is merely enabling that option by loosening these zoning restrictions, because right now it requires a whole bunch of zoning overrides, usually mayoral zoning overrides, to pursue infill housing and NYCHA campuses and other sorts of campuses. Back to the state budget, I don't know if you heard, the FAR cap was lifted in this past legislative session. As part of the budget negotiation, previously it's capped at 12. That means residential developments cannot build higher than 12 FAR. This is now lifted, so we have the ability to create new residential zoning districts that didn't exist before, using these new higher FARs. So we're proposing to create an R11 and R12 zoning districts. R11 would have 15 FAR of residential use. R12 would have 18. you can see that UAP and MIH is baked into this because sort of like the ZEO, while this is creating a new district, it's not mapping it anywhere. If you were to map an R11 district, that would trigger mandatory inclusionary housing. So that increment we talked about before applies. So the R11 district, you have 12 FAR of market rate as of right. And then that other 3 FAR would be income restricted housing. Same with R12, that'd be 15 FAR of market rate. And then an additional 3 FAR income restricted housing units. And then there are 2 other R6 districts that are sort of being created here to address sort of localized needs, like with the Bronx Metro North study. These are zoning districts that we believe should exist. I don't know exactly what they're addressing now. We talked about landmarks before, individual LPC landmarks. Right now, there are 2 issues with transfer of development rights under landmark sites. One thing is it's an onerous approval process. It requires a special permit. In the hierarchy of discretionary city planning commission approvals, the easiest is a chair cert, which is what the first presenter was talking about with the transit easement, followed by authorizations being slightly more involved and special permits being the most involved. So this would change it from a special permit to a chair cert to transfer floor areas from landmark sites. Given that right now, the universe of receiving sites, as they're called, of floor area from landmark sites is pretty restricted. Oftentimes it's on an eligible receiving site. In the adjacent area, it has to be across the street or immediately off the lot, as you're able to see here. The landmark site is in darker shade, and then lighter shade is the universe of eligible receiving sites. So you're able to see we're proposing to dramatically extend the universe of eligible receiving sites for landmark TDR under this proposal. That's a way to produce more housing to ease the financial burden that's sometimes placed on owners of landmark sites when they can't find eligible sites to transfer the development rights to. So it's both pro-housing and pro-preservation at the same time, I think. This is getting a little in the weeds. We're also clarifying and simplifying the special permit for railroad right-of-way. Right now, there's a special permit required to build over active railroad right-of-way. There's one ongoing right now on 135th Street. Yeah, exactly. Sort of over the like Hudson River Metro North rail line, where it's sort of like cantilevers over the rail track. We're proposing to make that a less onerous approval process to sort of expand where housing can be built by moving that from a special permit to an authorization in larger sites and a chair cert for smaller sites, and the relevant transit authority and body would be consulted. Yeah. Am I missing anything? Yeah. Special districts. So one note on this is that this proposal is being sensitive to the various planning goals embedded within special districts. Such as special 125th Street, what you often have are suppressed FARs. For a variety of reasons, either incentivize voluntary inclusion in housing or the VPA bonus, which is the visual performing arts bonus. That's what the National Black Theater is using. So this is not eliminating those suppressed FARs. Rather, in cases where a development takes advantage of UAP, like in special 125th Street, which was formerly, or if this passes, would be formerly a voluntary inclusionary housing area, the UAP bump is just 20% over whatever the suppressed FAR is. So it's not bringing it up to that full UAP. FAR would just be 20% greater than whatever the suppressed FAR of that district within the special district is. Okay, so that is really the bulk of what's applicable here in Community District 11. Jessica helpfully pointed out we're running short on time, but we just want to really briefly hit on the proposals for low density districts, since I think it's important to see how this is a holistic approach that will hopefully boost housing in low density context incrementally as well. As we already touched on, due to restrictive zoning, virtually no housing is being produced in the city's single family districts. I mean, all the single family lots have been built out. There's not really a lot of scope there. But there's a lot of potential and we think they can do more to produce housing. So for one thing is town center zoning. So this map is not helpful because it's showing where that'd be applicable, which is nowhere, yeah, community district 11. But where it would be applicable is in low density, like R1 to R5 neighborhoods where you have commercial zoning, right? And that's usually like in the main artery of that neighborhood. Historically, what you had before the 1961 zoning resolution were ground floor retail and, you know, 3 or 4 stories of residences above the ground floor retail. Under today's zoning, it's not really possible to build this type of what we call town center typology in lower density districts due to restrictive envelopes. So in cases where there is a commercial zoning district in a low density context, we're proposing to boost the FAR, the allowable residential FAR, where ground floor retail is maintained. To sort of facilitate this classic typology that has sort of gone out of existence, but you'll recognize in low density context of the city is that, you know, they're everywhere and you just don't see them being built anymore. So the idea is that this would re-enable that sort of typology. They would still have to include the ground floor retail. It's also the sort of proposal that would only really work absent.
Right, currently, both that ground floor retail and all of those apartments have a parking requirement. So you can't physically build that building without knocking down the next door building to put your parking in. And so by eliminating the parking requirements, it enables, you know, this.
Right, in addition to relaxing side yard and rear yard requirements and other sort of things like that. Another plank is transit oriented development. This city is very lucky and that has the richest mass transit, most robust mass transit system of any major city in the United States. Yet, even in areas that are in close proximity, what we're defining as half a mile to a transit station, you have very restrictive zoning that isn't really reflective of that context, the fact that there is mass transit in a 10-minute walking distance, because that's what a half mile is. So we're proposing to allow for modestly sized multifamily in low density residential districts, provided they meet the following criteria. That is, and you can probably speak to this too, Angela. They would have to be a 5,000 square foot site, so larger sites. We're talking about like larger multifamily apartment buildings and otherwise low density contexts that are either on wide streets or on the short end of the block, you know, so we're talking about not mid-block context, but you know, where larger, bulkier multifamily buildings would be appropriate. And these buildings would rise to 3 to 5 stories, so we're talking about a modest scale, and this is where the whole little bit of housing everywhere comes back into it, because it's not gonna be a dramatic transformation, you know, it's not gonna be a Long Island City type transit-oriented rezoning. It's just about facilitating a bit more density where we think it's appropriate, where people can walk to the subway. It's also what's called missing middle housing. You know? It's a little bit more about 2D. Another part of this that's really exciting is accessory dwelling units. This is another area where New York is lagging behind other cities. You probably have heard about ADUs. This is, you know, when a garage in the backyard is converted for residential occupancy, and that could either be a relative living there or it could be rented, and that's tends to be a more affordable typology that's accessible. Otherwise, you know, it's not really, low density contexts aren't accessible for people of you know, modest incomes. Whereas we do think that ADUs would really expand the universe of affordably priced sites. For New Yorkers, these are sort of based by typology, so I don't have the typology slide. But it's not just the garages, but we're proposing ADUs could be attics as well as basements.
In specific areas.
In specific areas, it would not in coastal flood zones, because obviously that would be problematic. in Ida, we saw casualties. But the fact is that this is a context that's already existing, that's widespread, illegally, unfortunately. So this creates a pathway towards safe, habitable basement apartments. Which I think is better than the alternative because people.
Right, yeah, and if they're legal, it means they can be regulated
Right.
and monitored. And this is also an example of, you have to get rid of the rear parking requirement in order to even turn this garage into an ADU.
Exactly. And, for the homeowner in a single family district, this has the potential to add value to their to their property. So we think this would be an attractive proposal. And we think it will significantly increase the amount of housing that is allowable in these low density contexts. And as part of this proposal, touching on the downloading to the Bloomberg era, you have a lot of R2 districts that are multifamily, but in name only. The rear yard requirements, other aspects of the zoning envelopes for these districts are so restrictive to the point where many two-family homes in low family districts aren't even compliant, which can be a major headache in getting DOB sign off for work permits. So this would actually legalize what is right now a typology that's legal in name only, which is this sort of two-family buildings and things. And I think we've made it, so that is
Record breaking.
broad overview of City of Jasper housing opportunity. Overall, we're hoping it'll be less pressure on gentrifying neighborhood, ending exclusionary zoning. This whole proposal has its roots in where we live in NYC. This was a very involved research document that was spearheaded by HPD to further fair housing in New York City, and the proposals that we discussed tonight drew from that, the research and outreach of that proposal, and we really think that this would further fair housing in New York City and ease pressure on gentrifying neighborhoods. So that's it. We can try to take any questions.
Yes, prior to taking questions, let's just run through the process.
While we're waiting on process, can you just go back to the summary slide at the very beginning?
Sure.
Thank you.
Process?
So the presentations today. They will do a public session of full board on May 21st. They'll re-present next month with the interest of acquiring a resolution, which will be June 12th. And then it's subject to change, obviously, because the chair has the right to change the meeting. And then 6:25 will be the full board for ratification vote. So from now till full board, we have about a week and a half. So I do understand that we're interested, we're getting into the meat and the potatoes of it. But do understand, as done with the previous City of Gas proposals, we have a streamlined process with DCP in submitting the questions directly to Jose and Trevor. They get us formal responses through their authors. And it's gonna be the same practices we've done for the last one. So any questions on that? On process? Yeah.
Just to clarify, as we've learned, it's very helpful, Trevor, thank you for your walkthrough of something that is incredibly in-depth. Yeah, but typically we get to hear from George James to boil it all down at some point. So imagining that would happen next month, we would get a download from George, who would be able to distill this, and by the nature of his role as our land use consultant, he would call out things that we should be concerned with. I know Jordan's been chewing on this one for a while.
Right.
To have that information sooner than later, so that as we move through the process, we're not waiting for Jordan's presentation next month to start to think about some of these things. So that's a process question.
Yeah, it will provide that, and then we will submit the questions to DCP at the end of the class. But yes, we can
Modify, so The public hearing will be on the 21st, like you said, and George will be presenting during the public hearing on the 21st, so
Great.
not wait until next month.
Thank you.
And just one last thing, this presentation that DCP shared with us today, thank you, Trevor and team, is already available on our site, on the land use database, as well as the calendar entry for today's meeting.
Thank you.
Another process question, Ellie? Yes.
Yeah, so last time when we did this, there were all these buckets and we had to vote individually on each measure. What is the expectation from DCP this time?
It is similar. I just pasted in the chat. All of the proposals kind of like outline similar to this. And that is, less about like voting specifically on that. It was more to help people distill every single piece of the proposal and kind of say, like, what do we have comments on this? So we don't have any comments on that. We thought that was helpful for carbon neutrality. We repeated for economic opportunity, and we are doing it again for this text amendment.
What something you're providing us so that we can search all the things, great.
Yeah, we have. But we will, again, I do implore you, let's not wait necessarily for these documents and formalities, because we do want to get the information and the questions as fast as possible to others. As if you recall from previous practice, they were able to make a lot of the modifications prior to our resolution. Morris,
So are we still on process questions or can we have the content?
sure, that we're still in process. No more? Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah. I don't like when, the city tries to present a complex zoning initiative, during the hiatus period. It puts pressure on people, they have to change their plan, the ones who are serious about being involved. They have to change their plans, over the summer, and I don't think it's really fair for the city to really, to do this at this time, they could wait till, but this is gonna take up the whole summer. And they always do this. They did this with 125th Street, the Columbia expansion, this is like all about trying to rush stuff in. How many pages is this, by the way?
Zoning text.
Yeah, so it's always like, 1,000, it's not fair, and I think it's, it's not being, forthright.
Well, I hope to provide some reprieve in the conception of process of practice, right? It's gonna come to us, then it's gonna go to the borough president, and then it goes to city council, so there's gonna be more opportunity to be involved.
No, I'm saying it's all during, the summer.
This will be going, actually, for us, it'll be within the next 30 days, but I understand your concern.
Yeah, because I'm gonna be involved with the borough president, I'm not just stopping here, gonna be involved with the city planning commission. So
It's challenging, and that's why we volunteered for this practice, but we're definitely looking forward to our constituents being involved in the public processes, because I promise you, the last two, we had no public testimony from anybody within the district. So we'll ensure to notify and continue to advocate, but this particular proposal, we've been forewarning it since December of 2023.
Just to clarify on process, we're going to get the feedback from our land use consultant minutes before we have our public hearing.
No, he's going to present as part of the public hearing, just like these guys presented tonight.
So the opportunity then for public feedback will be immediately after that.
Yes.
Okay, and the last two City of Yes packages were delivered in a way that was consumable. This is completely undigestible in its current format, even though I know that it is because it's different for every place when you go to visit. But I think what we care about here and targeting what we care about relative to some of the issues, and that goes to content questions. So process, appreciate you and your work. At the same time, it is unwieldy and more unwieldy in its delivery.
makes us have to rely on this moment of distillation that then comes at the moment of purification. So problem, but get through it because we do.
Is there any more questions on process? Thank you. Questions to the presentation? Andy?
So I have two, so can I just start with one? Thanks for the presentation, that's good. But I have, are you including this proposal of yes, city of yes, the existing buildings that are vacant, like boarded up and it's just sitting there and you're talking about, if you re-gut and rehab them, you're talking about probably even getting more than 50 units out of that. You know, and these are old buildings that have been built pre-war and they're existing. I don't know if you've walked up in East Harlem on Lexington Avenue, 110th Street, all that corridor on Lexington only, on 110th Street, all the way down to 109th Street. All of that is vacant, including the commercial fronts. And so, you know, you can get a lot of units out of that. Is that, like buildings like those being part of the city of yes? Because I don't know, maybe I missed it but I didn't see any conversation, presentation around that area. And, also, are you working with those landlords or actually, they're getting off on taxes, right? Leaving it vacant. So, I think that if that's not included, that's something that should be looked at, not overlooked and just look at just little lands that we can build on. These are existing, you can get up and running. You can get people to start moving in. Once it gets re-gut and rehab, it doesn't take more than 18 months. You know, I mean, I'm sure it depends on the structure of that building's nature of how long it's been abandoned. But also, it's stating that a lot of people want studio apartments. That's not necessarily so. I don't know where those surveys were done, but as far as I know, every single day, I'm seeing lots and lots of families needing 2 and 3 bedroom apartments and even 4 because we have large families and we have new neighbors also settling in to our community. So we also need to accommodate the family size. Studios are not it. And the fact that you're doing studios that are like micro apartments, you're not thinking about people who have, claustrophobic, obesity, if they need to have constant wheelchairs in their apartment, in a studio apartment, that's not gonna be fitting. So it's not actually giving housing rights to everybody, ADA compliant has to be first and foremost. I know you have that, but I'm just trying to, it has to be included. But, when you're thinking about sizes, you just can't like split, maybe this room here could be split into a 2 bedroom apartment, but, gotta think about the sizes. And knowing that there's existing families coming into this community and they are growing. And also the ones that are still existing here wanna stay, but it's large families, so I wouldn't be just all for the studio apartments. The other thing I wanted to ask was, was that, and then the parking lot, can you build over do a different design while keeping existing parking, but then you can build over it, like a hatch, and then add more apartment units to an existing development that is like, for example, let me just say, in 116th Street, we have a senior building that has a parking, and it became part of the requirement because it's more than 75 units. And so now, like you're saying, it's underutilized, so if it's being underutilized, can you build over it on top to make like an extension? Is that part of the city of yes, or you can't do it like that? I'm just trying to see how that, development will fit into what's existing and what we can do with what we have right now, not down the pipeline 10 years later and new administrations later.
But you want to start at the beginning?
Yeah, and I'll let you speak to the
Sure,
parking.
I'm sorry.
I do want to say,
You wrote all these questions down, right?
Yeah,
we'll do a quick answer.
Yeah.
We're gonna email them as well, but yeah, try to digest.
We'll get you a more
Decide to
formal,
comply.
comprehensive answer to all these questions.
Yeah,
But we do want to make a distinction that as far as income restricted housing units, the HPD term sheets, they still dictate certain unit mixes,
Mhm.
including, you know, a set requirements for 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom, sort of like the previous speaker touched on.
And also ADA requirements.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I think in the first part of your question, you were sort of touching on the warehousing of rent stabilized units. And you know, that is an issue. It's not part of this proposal. We estimate that to be about maybe 10,000 units citywide when we're facing a housing supply issue on the magnitude of hundreds of thousands of units. So while that does warrant further investigation, this proposal here is really looking at expanding housing supply in terms of new housing, not just, you know, bringing existing warehouse units back on the market. But I think the previous state budget and the new tax abatement sort of works on some of those issues in terms of the loophole and.
Yes, yeah, I would agree that this particular proposal is thinking about new housing. And then there are other mechanisms and other things that are addressing rehabbing existing.
Right, but we have a crisis now, so we gotta work with what we have. And I think that should be included, that you can do something like now,
Yeah.
than to wait down the pipeline and all the. But this is like the whole rezoning mess that we all got into, but I'm just, you know, I'm not trying to stay the whole 9 years, I'm sorry, I already talked, but when I do, I have my reasons. But I just think that the city planning should think about including these existing buildings. And it's that exactly, because you're part of preservation, that should be part of it, including them as well. Getting those buildings right now, that can be fixed, rather than to wait for a developer, go through the whole process. And God knows when it's gonna get done, and we need it right now, you know, this, I don't know.
I just wanted to add some information in there, and thank you for those points, because I think that is incredibly important when we are doing a tax amendment, when, you know, this will affect every type of development that will happen in the city after this is approved. You know, we're talking about a timeline right now, kind of going back to the process on when we need the end of the public review by the community boards is July 8th, then going back to the CPC for about 60 days or so, and city planning, city council for 50 days. We're talking about, you know, until sometime in November, December of this year. So there's still some time for the end of the public review. But, you know, once this is approved, this will be available in all of the districts that were proposed, you know, from, especially when we're talking about East Harlem, we're talking about R6 to R10s. You know, right now, I was just in a Second Avenue walking tour, in East Harlem recently, looking at those, and then I came down to Park Avenue, looking at the apartments, and I seen something on Lexington as well. You know, these are things that are not only depending on zoning or, you know, HPD, as I heard you guys talking early on about, you know, how to approach private developers or how the city should be doing this. You know, we are seeing that if allow and if approved, the additional floor area could incentivize developers who perhaps haven't finished, you know, these developments to add additional housing because of the incentive of that additional floor area, similar to, you know, the inclusionary housing program, the mandatory inclusionary housing program, by making it, you know, essentially optional and available without having to go through ULURP. You know, this will potentially be a lot more attracted to them. And, you know, as Trevor mentioned earlier too, the you know, lifting of the cap as well as the package for financial tax benefits for 485X, right? I believe it's called, which is, you know, replacing 421A, and there's also the extension of 421A to a larger deadline, which potentially will allow some of the buildings to continue the construction. So this is all a package. I think, you know, that is very important for us to take a look, and we are now, you know, talking to individual developers on this. We did a whole year plus round of conversations with the public, with different housing advocacy groups to include this proposal. But in terms of, like, you know, adding individual proposals, we are not proposing any map amendment or any development as part of this text amendment. This is, you know, what we can look at is a set of new regulations that, you know, will be applicable in the future. And I think I just wanted to leave it at that for clarification, but I think we're taking notes and I know you guys are gonna be sending you questions, so we'll add anything in there to clarify.
Thank you. Yes, just to reiterate, please, committee members, do email me your questions so we can consolidate when submitting the package with George James referrals. Jessica Morris.
I think the biggest, most mysterious set of changes in my mind as it relates to how it may affect East Harlem is, and I appreciate, Trevor, that you kind of reassured us that there are other steps in the process before any radical change would happen. Once the zoning piece of red tape in doing anything is changed. But we have the highest concentration of NYCHA campus, and it is a huge connected network throughout East Harlem in a way that shapes how people move here. Whether you live on campus, next to a campus, it is through and through the sort of the fabric of East Harlem. So I would like a better understanding. I'm looking at the picture of campus infill. What the purpose of campus infill is to knit some of those places together. We know that the inward focus of campuses leave these super blocks. We've got lots of super blocks. What is the sort of potential down the road of these changes and those processes, of course, we would hope will involve many layers of public input, both from the developments themselves, but then also overlays of commercial corridors or things that we have that have been sitting there quietly for a very long time. And in a place that has been rezoned and rezoned and rezoned and rezoned, those layers of change mean what's gonna happen all of a sudden. And you know, that potential is what's scary when you hear campus infill and you have a campus rich district. So I don't know if you have the answer, but I think to have that conversation as a part of understanding what we may be saying yes to in the city of yes, that I think is one of the things that's not well described, but really critical to what we have here as a set of conditions. So help us understand that, or maybe George will, or if you or kind of, you know, team has any insight or can point us in a direction, or decode some of those overlays, or if there's a set of resources. Or if you need to defer, it's okay, I just want to voice it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We hear you, Jessica, and obviously that's a subject that's very sensitive to East Harlem, like you said, with the constant, the number of NYCHA campuses here. I think it warrants probably a more nuanced answer than we can provide unless there's anything.
No, I mean, I think that is a fantastic question. Yeah, and I
Maybe
want
there's
to.
a partner at NYCHA that also knows that, I know you do some interagency coordination.
Yeah, we have been working with HPD pretty closely on this as well, like.
Maybe love to hear, you know, I don't know. There's no specific question, but it's a big question.
Yeah.
We have a housing committee, but we definitely have concerns relative to the infill projects. I probably got like 10 messages while you guys were talking. You went over everything except what affects us the most, right? We talked about high density, which is great, but it's not gonna affect us as much as it's gonna affect Queens, and I didn't really see Staten Island. But yes, we're concerned with our projects.
Yeah.
But I also could see the potential of benefit for like the colleges that are renting all these buildings around it. And maybe they should build buildings inside of their schools.
That's
So that way we can have housing for our people, for the people, not our people, but. I love Morris's point, and I think that. Anyone else have questions relevant to the infill portion? No?
And just really quickly to Jessica's point, I was surprised that we spent any time on low density and we didn't spend all of that time on campus infill, just given the fabric of our neighborhood, but I personally am struggling to write questions on what to ask, because I don't know what it is, so I need a
We'll
lot more
send you the
information.
comprehensive rundown of what campus infill means.
Thank you.
And prepare for full board.
Because
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a point of it
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think maybe you should flip that relationship at full board.
Angel, then Candy.
That was an invisible hand you recognized. I was just gonna say that George James has a hand up.
Yes, give me a second for George. I want George live.
So but I do have something to say about infill.
Please,
Um,
because it's already happening for some of us that aren't aware.
yeah, and I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think what, you know, what I'm hearing from what's being presented is that they're presenting based on the tools that they have, right? Like the questions about, you know, what happens with the buildings that are boarded up now is an absolutely fair question, because it's what we're living with. But it's not their tool to like, I think their tools present an opportunity for something to be done, but there's a limitation because of that, those are their tools. So somebody else, you know, if it's HPD or the market or whatever, has to get these people off the pot, it's goodness gracious, it's been so long. But with infill, like if you've been following like what's happening down in Chelsea, like, is it Chelsea or is it the Lower East Side?
Elliott Housing.
Right, I'm like, that's really interesting, what, you know, the opportunities that are gonna be presented to existing residents of NYCHA. That are gonna get a brand new building to live in versus something that's, you know, rehabbed and, you know, a lot of times, you know, rehabbed in place, like, you know, I was part of, and you were the two, part of the conversations during, you know, Bloomberg's infill proposal. And there were residents that were insisting on not moving out and insisting on rehab in place. You know, you guys work construction, that's gonna be a poor rehab,
It's happening right.
right?
now.
It's gonna be a poor rehab, you're gonna
It's
get
happening
paint,
right now in Canal Street.
right? You're gonna get paint in a couple of cabinets versus you're getting a brand new place to live. So, not to say that, you know, right or wrong, but just throwing that on the table for like something for us to be considering once that is before us, you know, actual infill proposals are starting to come before us. Cause it shouldn't just be, I don't think we should be limited in our consideration of that conversation.
Zoning is meant to unlock potential, is what you're getting at.
Yeah.
And I agree. But what is it? What is that potential is what I'm asking,
Yeah.
kind of.
It's not a one size.
And sell it to us at full board, and I'll be in conversations with housing, because I know they're very interested in.
George.
Before George,
Oh.
Jessica.
Yeah.
No, I didn't, you went first. You had
My
five questions.
non-info question. Before I ask dumb questions via email, I'll ask them in person. Just really, how it relates to the other zoning proposals. You mentioned there was an attention to special districts, and I may be wrong, but didn't the city of Yes zoning for economic opportunity to remove special districts?
But not entirely, I think what you're referring to is when ZO removed some ground floor use restrictions that were embedded in the special 125th Street district.
Got it. Okay, and then similarly, I guess. What's the sort of reasoning of adding new zoning districts after the whole effort of removing all of the, like simplifying it as much as possible? Like, why were these 4 new zoning districts deemed important enough to create new ones after all of the work that was done to simplify it?
You talking about the R11 and the R.
In the R6A or whatever.
Right, so these are, like we touched on before, these were districts that couldn't exist previously due to the FAR cap being, that was a state imposed cap, and now that that's gone. We think it's appropriate to have these new high density districts that go up to 15 and 18 FAR, because if you look at buildings that were built before 1961. There's some classic New York examples that can be built under today's zoning, like the Dakota on the west side is above 12 FAR. So we think in certain limited contexts, like maybe Midtown Manhattan or Long Island City, that sort of context. Higher density residential buildings are appropriate, and that's a great avenue to create more housing and increase the supply more generally. But again, that's something that would have to be mapped, like as they mentioned, that would have to be subject to full ULERT. But it is an important plank of the overall housing proposal.
And just really quick on the vacant housing, and we've talked about it, but like when you were showing the low density and it was just the ground floor retail, I was like, oh, Lexington Avenue, 3rd Avenue, like that's all we have is ground floor retail, and it's like, we have these landlords land banking, so if we can't do anything with y'all in this process, like what can we do? Like, we were rezoned, the FR, we already gave them market reasons to do something, and there's just vacant lots without anything, there's vacant lots with some, you know, elevator pit in the center for future building, and then there's all these crappy, ground floor retail of like checks cash and like crap we don't need and nothing of value for the neighborhood and just like thousands of houses unused, and it's just astonishing that we can't find some way to fit that in.
That is a great question. I think like there's a lot of nuance that would be required in unpacking the conditions in the East Harlem, like 125th Street is a whole different animal, that's a world of its own, and a whole different set of regs that are embedded in that special district. But we are fairly confident that you will see new development with this set of tools, and especially with, you know, the new tax abatement program that we lobby hard for. We do think it's gonna actually catalyze some development. In East Harlem.
Thank you.
Really?
Thank you. Thank you, for that presentation. I know it's been tough to get through it. You went through it well, Trevor, I mean, exceptionally well, and Angela, thank you. It's definitely a lot to unpack here. Definitely look like there's some really good things that can happen with this, and then some really concerning things, and it's just, I would imagine most people feel that way. In one of the earlier slides, I don't know if you can, maybe the second or third one, you tracked what the previous year's units were. And then you mentioned what you wanna track for now, right there, I think that was one of them, and the next slide. Okay, so basically, can you go back to the previous slide, Charlie? The tracking is like from, you mentioned it was basically around 20K units every year. For every 10 years, we've seen about 200,000 units. Previous.
Oh, okay.
Go to the bar chart, that's where you made that statement back.
Yeah, there was, yeah.
The next slide.
What did you do?
Just the next. The battery died.
It's running out of steam too.
Battery.
There was some.
I think the Zoom is freezing up.
Yeah, so it seems to be some previous 10-year periods when you were tracking development. In terms of the unit amounts, where it looked like it was about tracking about 200,000 units for every 10 years. Which was pretty much right, which makes it that makes that 20,000 per year. And then you mentioned that this particular plan wants to bring on board 100,000 units in 15 years. That, right?
Yes.
So if we would track that 200,000 previous, and you also started with, and I agree, this is a extremely aggressive plan, right? And we wanna remove parking requirements everywhere, right? We want to increase studios, right, by removing dwelling unit factors. We wanna create new zoning districts by increasing the FAR, right? We wanna loosen landmark restrictions, right, to transfer development. We wanna stick apartment in garages, attics, basements, right? That's what we wanna do. And if we do all that you plan here, I think you're gonna I think we're gonna have way more than 100,000 units in 15 years when we've been tracking 200,000. I'm just looking at some simple math. So I think this is really aggressive plan. I think the city is proposing this to kind of see if they can get a good portion of this. I don't really think they expect to get everything being requested here, but that's just my thoughts. But I just would look at moving forward with this process. Of those units that you guys intend to develop here, you mentioned certainly some of which are gonna be market rate, some are gonna be affordable rate. So my question is, what percentage is market versus affordable out of the whole waft of all these developments and units that are gonna be created? Do we have that?
That might be an environmental.
Like if we're looking to propose 100,000 units, of the 100,000, how many are gonna be affordable? How many are gonna be markets? 80% market rate and 20% affordable? 90% market rate or 10% affordable? I mean, just elaborate, I mean, you guys delved into every number possible here. You don't have that number?
So
Yeah.
let me just correct one thing in here. So what Trevor was mentioning was the 200,000 units of housing that were to be produced if the Uniform Affordability Program was in place 10 years ago. So that's the 20% specific additional floor area in all districts throughout. So, you know, that is the estimate that they did for the previous 10 years. Our estimates for housing in here, and this is perhaps going to be a little bit, you know, another number, but it's between 58,000 and 100,000. So, you know, when Trevor mentioned 100,000, we're going with a big number. We're going with this, but the estimate of the environmental impact statement between the 15 years is between 58 and 100,000. So it is a huge range, as you can tell, between 50 and 100,000 what we are producing. It's also, you know, when we are mentioning a little bit of housing everywhere, we truly mean that, because the projections indicate that it is 1 unit of housing per half an acre. You know, so like I know when we are looking at this proposal, we can see like, well, there's going to be new housing in every single new apartment or so. But, you know, through the estimates and the analysis that the environmental thing and the consultants have done, we were looking at, you know, only 1 unit of housing per the whole half acre in New York. So that kind of the estimate goes around 50,000 to 100,000 units of housing. And, you know, this will also include, you know, 100% affordable buildings, will include the 20% and 80% market rate housing. Will also include the 25% and, you know, 35% of mandatory inclusionary housing. So it's very hard for us to say, okay, thank you, Trevor, for putting here, because I couldn't remember exactly where we're looking at. But, you know, this is essentially what the projections are. I can get back to you, but you know, the answer that I got before was like, it's going to be hard to estimate how many of those were going to be, you know, inclusive of market affordable housing. But, you know, if we go with 100,000 and we just say 20% of them will be affordable, we're looking at 20,000 additional units of affordable housing. I, you know, would like to say that that is 100% correct. But again, you know, we don't specifically can give that, you know, amount or that specific number.
But we can project 58 to 100,000, so that's like 60 to 110,000 more or less, right? But we can't project the amount of what may be affordable versus market. Yeah, I think you guys should take a look at that to come up. I'm pretty sure if you, dove into the info here, you might be able
And just for the
to write
community,
that.
we have every right to ask a question, and we have even further right to advocate, because I do hear the concern, which is, again, us giving a blank check to rich developers to come in here and take over the city and not go after any of your tax credits and displace and or actually accelerate gentrification. So I think the concerns that are being brought forth, which will constantly be brought forth by this board, is because of our concerns for the disenfranchised and the individuals that want to age in place. Beverly, then Candy, and then George. And if I may, unless there's a pressing question that is probably outside the purview, I do request that you submit both your questions. And more importantly, what I'm hearing, and I love and I know Kevin's doing a great job, is your recommendation. Right? I want your recommendation, right? I want these recommendations because I rather DCB tell me no, they can't do it, it's only text. And then we go to DOB, HPD, and every other agency and say, well, you need to say yes, right? Because again, they're just changing the regulation. But again,
My question, and is to piggyback on a lot that everyone said here, is regarding affordability, like, you know, 20%. Are y'all taking in this 15 years? 58 to 180,000 units, 108,000 units, that the AMI goes up every year. Every year. And it does not help the people who are struggling now. I don't hear anything in these proposals, even when you're changing housing for the offices. If there's any plan to implement a program or something that stays in place that they will be affordable to, people who's struggling now. I'm concerned that 20% of housing affordable to the lower income is a small number. It's way, way too small. Even under the 421A program, 70% of the buildings that they did was market rent. Market, that's very high, and we're in this predicament now because people are paying more than 50% of their income for rent. Even, it's not even you guys going for programs that's, for home ownership. This is becoming a totally city of renters. And at mercies of the developers, you're gonna still have a problem with people being homeless. And I don't see anything in the program of the city of Yes to address this at all. At all.
The city also, the UAP is deeper than the current income restricted housing for that is set up at 80% and also adds the option to do average housing. So UAP will be deeper at 60% affordability. I understand that it's not, perhaps what the most reflecting on all community boards or on all neighborhoods of New York. I understand AMIs are continue to raise. That is something that we're also constantly asking, city council members and people upstate, because that's something that they can do out there. But we're extremely proud of this proposal to be able to offer it at a deeper affordability than is currently expected. There might be some wiggle room between how much it can vary, but the law is written that way, between, I believe, is 40% and 80% that they can move around. I think the approval has come out with the full support council members at 60%. But I just wanted to flag that, this proposal is, adding additional affordability that is currently contemplated in the mandatory inclusionary housing. And that, was a really uphill battle with our, with other members of New York. So, and we're extremely proud to say that that is what we're proposing. We're also we work with HPD in a lot of, conversations to ensure that that was something that could potentially, make it to the end of the proposal.
Thank you, Jose, and Beverly Candy, and then George James, please.
It's gonna be quick. Are you including this presentation with the residents of NYCHA? Not just having conversations with NYCHA, but also like the CCOP, everybody the people that actually live within the complex that should be able to be aware of what actually is being included in the city of Yes and trying to develop within the campuses and the infilling, because I don't know if you remember it was a nightmare and it was tearing people apart in the community about what they wanted with the infills. And this is not a one size fit all, so I don't think that it should be in every housing development, because then everybody's gonna be able to pass the coffee and the sugar from one window to another. You put it everybody else. So they see a space there, let's build right there. I'm just saying. But I mean, are you including them as well? Like, we're community board members, we're gonna do a public hearing. But how are you doing the outreach to speak to the residents of NYCHA and especially in East Harlem? How are you doing that outreach? And I think you need to include them and listen to them as well. And I mean, we're gonna do the outreach ourselves too, to get them to come to the public hearing, but it merits for you to get the CCOP, usually have their meetings like a day like today. They cancel, but it's something that you need to just, if anything, think about that. And that's what I just wanted to just say, to make it less, okay.
Thank you for the referral.
That's one of those things I think would be better for us to take back and get a
Okay,
more
but
thoughtful.
another thing is I want to say is that, what are you doing?
Remember, this is ECP.
I know.
Just remember, ECP.
Yeah, well, okay, I know.
Okay, continue.
But the federal is really the ones that change the AMIs every year, and we let them go scot-free. We can't be hitting the city council and the state legislators. No, we have to go to the federal Congress.
Yes.
Because they're the ones that, HUD is the one, every March comes down with a new AMI.
Yeah,
So
we have
that's
to,
what we
just
gotta
to
do.
advocate, I know it's, if for this committee have brought up on more than one occasion, the constant where housing's challenges become a part of our discussion, and that committee needs to do that resolution and activate those elected officials, because it's already a standard of conversation, and I know that the executive committee is working with housing, to get them in that position, because we have been having challenges with the committee. Yes, Jessica.
The survey that I QR'd around full board, Kenny, I did, that was to the ears of the New York Fed, that has the ability to pull strings related to some of those federal regulations. Mentioning AMI as one of those things that is an intractable problem that doesn't represent the communities that are affected by it. Those are places you can use your voice, because there are policy wonks embedded in those very powerful institutions that then are able to say, oh, that's a problem. And right, then they say, oh yeah, that's a problem. So
But I definitely would recommend this stuff to housing. Housing's got a lot of work. George James, and you will conclude us.
All right, great.
Definitely not least,
yeah.
our land use consultant.
Thank you. So this is, as Vinny was saying, it's just an enormous amount of work that you all have done. And it's an enormous thing to read. I can't imagine what it was like to write it. I do want to talk a little bit about infill, just so that the committee can start thinking about it between now and the next meeting. So the infill proposal is amazing because it cuts through all of the zoning rules. For years and years, we've been talking about infill on estates, and essentially they get rid of the open space ratio, they get rid of the residential open space requirement. They change the distance between buildings rule. So essentially, open spaces on the campuses all become development sites. They unify the FARs so that it's no longer on a sliding scale depending on how much open space you have. And so all of that open space, much of it, up to half of it, becomes a development site. One question I have for you, Jose, how much affordable housing is required by zoning to do infill on a housing estate for breaking those rules?
Let him speak, please.
That's a great question. And I think, if I don't have an answer.
I actually have the answer to that. It's 0. Okay. All right. So there's another rule that we can break now. It's
I want to be at 11 o'clock.
it's is that it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. There's other rules like the sliver rule, which we could break the rules now, and you don't have to provide any affordable housing. You can now, there's an authorization to increase your already built out building by 20% or 25% in height. And how much affordable housing would that require?
That is only if you're in irregular lots or qualifying lots.
Yeah, qualifying lots, right?
And
But
if
it
you are
doesn't require.
providing affordable housing, the 20%, you do qualify automatically for the authorization in any contextual or high factor.
And UAP is an optional program, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so where does this entire proposal have any required affordable housing?
At the fact that, if people want to get the additional floor area, will have the mandatory, like the affordable housing in it. Will be mandatory.
So it doesn't have any requirement for any affordable housing, and it has a 20% bonus, which you have to devote 20% to affordable housing. And you have other ways of getting floor area instead of affordable housing. The philosophy behind this zoning is if you build more housing, then housing becomes more affordable. It is not about rent regulated housing. It is about removing barriers to create market rate housing. And if you
Right.
want to do affordable housing, if you want to do it, you can. There's a bonus for it, but it's optional. And I think, for this community board and this community, which has the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan, which is all about affordable housing, which is primarily about rent regulated housing, this is a very different approach to the housing crisis than what was done in the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan and the East Harlem rezoning.
Oh, that sums it up for me.
Well, no, I think you're definitely correct on this. And I think, this, as we see it, and I think we're seeing it from two perspectives of like, one is facilitating development as we see it and trying to get more housing that is,
Absolutely.
highly needed in every other, we're not just talking specifically at Target, neighborhood. We're talking a huge scale geographically. So we're removing all these barriers everywhere, not specifically in Harlem, not specifically in, previously what we can say, targeted neighborhoods, right? So like we're removing everywhere to ensure development is
I agree.
straight out. I think, those points are definitely valid, specifically for the infill houses. We also have a lot of like, nicer campuses a little bit in the western side, which, we are getting rid of the limited height districts in all these areas. We're also getting, a little pushback on this, but I think, we want to be fair that this is something that, our neighborhoods can carry on the development housing for so long, and how we can still, move around this pressure everywhere else. If we don't, make this a little more flexible, it will continue to only be targeted or focused in specific areas where, we have East Harlem, we have the inward rezoning, we have like recent neighborhood rezonings that do have more flexible zoning envelopes and, are more enticing to developers for this.
I get it. I mean, but what you have to do is you have to believe that more market rate housing will result in affordability.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
I think, from an academic standpoint, I think the results are mixed.
To say the least.
And we'll definitely voice our position of concern on that.
Yeah. I think that's a very.
You had a comment, Trevor?
Yes, I think, there's like a philosophical difference here. It is fundamentally, I guess, we do believe that this is going to dramatically expand income restricted housing throughout the city. But you also do have to believe that there's fundamentally a housing supply crisis in the city. We tried to illustrate that at the beginning, that the lack of housing supply, lack of housing production, the fact that housing production is concentrated in a handful of neighborhoods has resulted in gentrifying outcomes in low-income communities by high-income communities effectively locking out any type of development that has a spillover effect into low-income communities. South of 96th Street, you're not really seeing much development since it's all landmarked, it's restricted zoning. This proposal, the fundamental philosophy is expanding housing types where housing can be built. And we do fundamentally believe that the proposals here will create relief for communities like East Harlem, because not all market rate units are created equally. We're talking about ADUs. We're talking about various types that are more affordable, like even increasing the supply of studios. That might be market rate, but that's more affordable than other types of units. If you're talking about an office to residential conversion in a high density neighborhood where you can then require affordable units, you can have all studios. You're getting a lot of younger, young professionals who would otherwise be looking to, split rent on a 3-bedroom in East Harlem in these higher income contexts. So we really do believe that there's about a 500,000 unit shortage in the city, and rent stabilized units, income restricted, that's all valuable, and there's a place for that, and there's part of that proposal.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you do have to address at some point this glaring shortage of housing, because the problems exacerbate year after year as household size decreases, as we add more jobs, and the job growth dramatically outpaces housing. So the crisis is already at terrible proportions, and it requires robust, comprehensive citywide solution, which this fundamentally is.
Chair, can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So just last meeting, the urban fellow that worked in East Harlem looked at all of the housing change in the district since 2010 by housing unit type. And the recommendation, one of like the three that she gave, was that East Harlem needs more family-sized units because whenever there are new units built, there's a preponderance of studios because almost every development bumps against the 680-foot dwelling unit factor because the market wants smaller units. Absolutely, absolutely true. But smaller units and studios are bad for the families that live here because they're bad for families. And there are so many of them, so that you're getting all of these studio units. Whereas just south of 96th Street, there actually has been a lot of development south of 96th Street. But the problem is we get south of 96th Street, you get an average unit size of 2,000 or 2,500 square foot per unit, right? Where you're getting these massive units and the zoning does nothing to address that, right? And it doesn't even try. It just says smaller units will be permitted. We'll let the markets determine this. And if you have a family and you're looking for a new apartment in East Harlem, you're going to have trouble.
Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Elliot, and then we're done.
Thank you. Just to your point about the, philosophy behind this, you all mentioned at the beginning that this is gonna give up, around maybe at the higher end, 100,000 units of housing. But you also mentioned that over 500,000 were needed. So I guess how does DCP marry the idea that, an apartment that was going for, $800 a month is now going for $4,000 a month? And what is the sort of like anticipation that even though we're infilling with more housing, that there's still such a great need? Like, what is preventing a landlord from saying, instead of $4,000, I'm gonna charge $10,000, and then the problem is exacerbated?
I mean, this proposal doesn't speak to rent stabilization. I'm not totally sure, but what we began this conversation by saying, in a circumstance like we have now with near 0% vacancy for affordable units, there's tremendous competition for these units, and the tenant is virtually powerless in this arrangement because the landlord has all the power when the tenant has absolutely no housing choice. There's not enough units. So we really do believe that by increasing supply everywhere, a little bit more housing everywhere, that will ultimately empower tenants by reducing competition for housing units, including like family-sized units in East Harlem that are being divvied up among young professionals who are in movers to the neighborhoods because there's not enough studios elsewhere. We do, I mean, philosophically, I think we genuinely believe in this proposal that it is a pro-tenant anti-gentrification proposal at its core. It emerged from the Where We Live fair housing study by HPD. And we do think that, it might be an indirect approach, this whole supply side approach, as opposed to something like, increasing the number of income restricted housing units, which is, part of this approach, but it's not all of it. But ultimately, you do have to address the supply issue in order to empower tenants and to fight tenant harassment, because in this current housing market, the tenant is powerless, and that's due to a lack of housing supply fundamentally.
Angel.
Yeah, so that theory, respectful.
Sure.
That I am gonna point my finger at your superiors, right? Like the mayor and his whole clan, that's the whole thing, supply side. It's based on a theory that if you have more supply, that's gonna control or lower costs. Nowhere in all of American history have costs ever gone down for anything. Anything, an apple, an apartment, nothing. And if we all understand that there's a projected population growth in the city of New York of, some crazy number, that means that we anticipate that people are gonna continue to move to the city of New York. And for however much increasing supply, which has, there's something to it, but it's really not everything. Like everything is the demand for those units and the financial wherewithal of those people with the demand, right? Like if somebody wants to pay a crazy amount of money, they're gonna pay it, right? And if there's nothing restricting me as a property owner to Jessica Elliott's question from, you know, charging whatever I want, you know, free market, then I'm gonna charge it, right? Like if Vinny approaches me, I'm gonna say, well, you know, I'm going to post the apartment at $5,000. And then as soon as he knocks on the door, it is now $7,000. And God forbid I knock on the door, or Jessica knocks on the door, it's gonna be $8,000, right? Because there's a demonstrated demand, right? So like that's what I think we can all understand, or, you know, will accept, it's the reality, right? So if there's some benefit or some relief for the property owner or some restriction placed on the property owner to then offer something affordable, then sure. But, you know, with the gloves off, you know, like this theory, you know, of this, you know, mayor, frankly, I don't work for him, so I can give a shit. Is that, you know, the market will provide. That's never happened. Never, not once, ever, you know, go buy a gallon of milk. It's crazy, right? And so, okay, so, and I appreciate the presentation very much, you guys are great. To the, you know, and this is outside the scope of what you guys are presenting. And I appreciate George bringing up the fact that there's nothing in the proposal that is restricting incomes, or that whatever restrictions there are is limited, you know, welcome, but still limited, but an option, right? So there's not a requirement. I did want to make one point while I have the mic. So the point that Candy made before about all these warehoused apartments, I will say that when the city is motivated, they will do whatever the hell they want to do to make things happen. Case in point, on 125th Street, there's this stalled development that had an eminent domain action because the city was motivated to facilitate the right for this development group to develop on that site. At the same time, this very same city with that same power has let all those units be vacant forever and a day. Like that fits, those buildings fit the blight description to a T, where the property on 125th Street were several vibrant, operating and dependent on businesses did not. However, that happened, and this hasn't, right? So like in those locations, you know, and I think this is part of, to me, part of the group of people that is working for this mayor must have had this discussion. So it's not just Dan Garodnick, it's also, you know, what the hell's his name at HPD, Carrion, right? And the rest of these cats and the deputy mayors should be thinking about all these things, right? It's supposed to be a package, right? So like what we're hearing is this thing, but we're not hearing anything to that point. And in this community that is just getting the incoming, like we're just going to get the supply of expensive, right? And in the areas where there's the MIH, then we'll have that number of restricted, and which we're very thankful for, right? But there's like south of 104th Street that wasn't mapped MIH. Anyone taking advantage of this program as written out, it's gonna be all expensive, right? And unless you choose to opt in, and you know, who's choosing to opt in? Like if I can make money on 96th Street, there's no way I'm opting in. Right, unless I'm motivated to get up a little taller and then sell my top units at a crazy number, right? But I think that's the kind of the limitation of that scope. So thank you, I just wanted to get that out, it's not targeted y'all, you guys are great.
Yeah,
It's just the philosophy that offends.
I totally agree, I think there's a lot of concern about the cross agencies.
Yeah.
Where we might be voting on the cart before the horse.
Just zoning can't solve housing.
Agreed. So, any other questions?
Just one, right, in regards to the idea or belief of more studios and one-bedroom apartments. You're not taking into consideration that these people may marry and have children. Where are they gonna?
What a concept.
I mean, why would you think that they're gonna stay single with no kids for the next 20 years?
Because they're pushing that agenda.
I mean, that's not even talked about.
Demographics, yeah.
at all.
There's a certain kind of demographic.
Yeah, these people are not gonna
all
stay
in this country.
single or now they can have babies by themselves, you know. But they're gonna have families. But you're pushing all of these one bedrooms and studio apartments, especially here, most of the buildings that we say, and then they're not affordable. You know, I mean, it's too much that y'all are pushing, but it's not helpful for the community. It's really not helping the community and the future of the community.
I totally hear you, Beverly. Can I just pose with like a theoretical scenario though? Let's just sort of on the flip side of this, like what could it mean for an HPD development in East Harlem? And obviously this is a geography where HPD is very active. Say there's a city-owned vacant lot that's sizable that HPD wants to build 100% affordable housing on. Through the proposals in CHO, HPD could request to upzone it to R11. We're talking about like 15 FAR, where only 12 was possible before. Even if they don't want to rezone it, they could still get that UAP bump where it wasn't available before, assuming that it wasn't in East Harlem corridors, like not an MIH area or a voluntary inclusionary housing area. So you get more affordable units, that increment's growing up. And also that, like we noted before, the HPD term sheets will still have those requirements about 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom, like unit mixes in general. We just think that zoning is not the appropriate vehicle for dictating unit size elsewhere, but in terms of, affordable housing, which is really like obviously the most important piece of this for this board. And we understand that. We think that there's still a lot that this proposal offers for in the realm of affordable housing development. I wouldn't totally.
So HPD term sheets are not really helping the situation to have more affordable housing based on what y'all want to do zone. It doesn't seem like it's matching.
It's like the HPD term sheets have rules of their own. So like zoning might not be requiring the apartments to average out at 688 anymore, but HPD's term sheets still will require those family size units that are so important.
But private, there's more private ownership than HPD. So most of those housing will be, or these changes for the zoning will be for private housing, and they're not gonna do,
It's just a question, if you believe that more studios will ultimately benefit the renters of East Harlem. We happen to believe that is the case, and we could, try to provide you with information about the argument, but it's a dialogue, and it's something that we keep talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, we're closed on the questions, unless is it new and revolutionary, we're gonna beat
No,
the.
no, we're not gonna beat it up, but it's, so your data that you receive, because this is just based on the data that I see. Now, you're saying that it's more housing, like more affordable, more studios are needed. Is that coming, you're getting that data from the Housing Connect, when people are applying, how many people are saying that they're looking for studio apartments? Is that data being collected from the Housing Connect, not the website, but the data that gets collected when people do apply and they put their portal, like how many people are stating, like market research, how many people are requesting studios? How many people are requesting family sizes? Because I can tell you one thing, we get more family sizes and studios is very, very, very scarce that people really say they want a studio.
It's like the only option.
Yeah, and you know what, and that's not even enough for people who are making $4,800 a year. We still got people living here like that. So you're not counting with the realistic numbers of real people that actually dwell within the unit. And I'm sure that it's not just in East Harlem, because we service everybody 5 boroughs, but I don't know where you're getting that data to say that that's exactly what everybody wants. So if you're getting that from HPD's Housing Connect, that should be a big resource right there to get that data from there as everybody applies. And we're talking about millions of people in New York City. So I don't know, but I think you need to revisit that a little bit.
We'll get back to you with with that data. I believe I seen it somewhere in the Where We Live report. I just wanted to caveat that, like the share housing is less about we need a one studio, one bedroom. It's more about like making it available. Right now, we had this concentration of where, only a few areas in the city can develop share housing, buildings or so. You have seen your first sharing here in Harlem, given the HPD leading these projects or so. So this proposal is making it available everywhere else where it's currently not available. I just wanted to caveat that. So it's less about we want one to two one in the studios and more about, where else can this be outloaded without the need for that, special permit that it was required for adding the community facility FAR, facilitating that. The other thing, and I think I want to close on this because I know you guys are going over time, but I did paste a chat in the chat, like a link with all of the CDA or the city-based organizations that have supported this proposal or so. I mean, Ascendant, a great developer that it works with you, have worked with us also in developing this in affordable housing. I think, you have various very community-based organizations and also partners that you work with that you can reach out and get a more of the answer of the perspective from them in terms of development. I think, Ascending is a trusted partner, is a city housing conference and council, I believe. But, I just wanted to close with that and ensuring that you feel free to reach out to them in terms of that. East Harlem has, a lot of the areas are already mapped for mandatory inclusionary housing. I think, bringing back what George James had mentioned before, I think, in terms of what will be most applicable in here, I think it would be less about the UAP, the additional floor area, and it will be more about those zoning modifications that are being proposed in here, right? The bold, the hike to as a right development, because you already had the 25% map. UAP will apply anywhere else aside from where mandatory inclusionary housing is already mapped. So there's some areas in 125th Special District, there's some areas closer to First Avenue that were in touch in the East Harlem corridor that could benefit from that additional bump and floor area, but most of your East Harlem corridor already has that mandatory inclusionary housing and already mapped in, so they won't get the additional bump for floor areas because they won't be rezoning. I don't think, I won't say they won't because they could potentially come back to us and seek a higher density area. But, for those, I think we should be looking at those, the campus infill, the bulk regulations. And if you have specific questions about that, please let us know because it's extensive into how much these things are changing specifically. And we can, come back to you with specific answers in a form of a memo or perhaps a walkthrough with one of our expert specialists in the housing department.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, DCP and Jose. Next steps. Jose, I love the chat, but I prefer email. Make sure you send me everything you put on the chat with the framework for the resolution. Thank you. That's DCP. Members, email your concerns, please. Let's not put it all on me, and to go through the videotape and capture all your. You're loud speaking. And I really want to drain some of this down to housing and having some questions that I know we're worried about, but as Jessica and others have said already, this is DCP that's changing zoning to lift barriers from development, but it is not going to address anything relevant to concerns with how much an apartment's gonna cost. Then you hit it dead on the nail. It doesn't matter what DCP says, no, what options that are given. If it's not in law, it is not regulated, it ain't gonna happen. And I think, again, I brought this up to housing already for 3 months, so I'll speak to that executive, no, not the chairman, I'm gonna straight to the executive committee and see what they're working on to ensure that the membership and the constituents concerned are being advocated for, and not just that these proposals of legislation. Because the reality is, this is gonna go through it's gonna go through, period. So, let's be on the side of advocacy as opposed to, trying to contend or stop it. The reality is we're better off not supporting it and advising them of all of our concerns than sitting here and supporting it and then hoping that our concerns get addressed. So, again, that's always open to the table, so. With that said, it is now 9:21 PM, and I appreciate your service for the last 3 hours. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Great job, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. You really good conversation.
Just feel like I was angry.
I felt like I was being counted.
Righteous anger.
You guys, you.